Well, jeepers! You're listening to Smash or Pass.
Hello everyone, welcome back to another interview on the JayBee and Milly channel. I am JayBee and of course with me is Milly.
Hi.
We have Sophie
Hey.
and Dan.
Hi.
And the special guest who will be interviewing today is Steve Bramson. Thank you so much for joining.
Great to be here, guys. Happy to talk to you.
It's incredible to have you here. So you've got an amazing career, and I think people watching this will notice you from Scooby Doo on Zombie Island as the composer, which is absolutely incredible. We can't wait to get into discussing that. But I'd like to almost build up a timeline of your career. And I noticed that on your website it says that you were born into a family of musicians. And I was curious to know, to what extent do you think that this played a part in influencing you into getting into composing and the music industry?
Well, I think it was inescapable, I mean, composing, I couldn't have predicted composing at that time. None of my parents, neither one was a composer. My sister is a musician, not a composer. So that was my own thing, and that came later. But I grew up in an environment, music was around the house all the time. And both of my parents were in the classical world. My mother was a soprano, my father was a clarinetist, but a businessman. He had a music school and a music studio in the community. My sister is a pianist and songwriter. So yeah, my parents were constantly performing. We would go with them to rehearsals, to performances, kind of like a theater kid, except, not theater, right? And so there's no question that had a lot to do with it. And I also think, my first kind of serious introduction to music was, I think I was maybe in elementary school, and my father took me to a concert at the local, let me get rid of this please, 1 second. He took me to a concert of the neighboring high school band, and I heard some music played by a brass group that so excited me. I decided I wanted to learn to play the trumpet, which I did. But years later, I discovered, because I didn't stay with the trumpet very long, I discovered there wasn't the trumpet playing, perhaps specifically, it was the arrangement and the music and the harmony of the piece that excited me. I think so maybe that was the first sort of subliminal seed of composing and arranging when I heard that music.
Amazing. I think, like you said, it's safe to say being around music as much as you were, certainly, somewhere in the industry was inevitable. And do you think there's any, composers or media, be it movies or anything like that, that kind of influenced your career or maybe started to direct you on that composing route?
Well, for me, what happened was, I mentioned my family were mostly involved in classical music. What ultimately drew me into music full time was jazz. The harmonies and rhythms of jazz resonated with me, and that was my first inspiration. And that's the first kind of music that I really began to study and to play because I switched to piano after trumpet. And so those early records and things that I was learning about and studying, jazz and popular music too at the time. Those are the first early influences, without mentioning any specific, people. But it wasn't until I think about this often. I think it wasn't until I was in graduate school that I really kind of discovered film scoring and the idea of scoring music to movies or TV. I mean, I certainly was aware of it, but the idea that it was something you could do for a living and also something that, that I might want to do came later. Yeah. And then, I can sit and list, composers who I've grown to admire over the years, but I wouldn't say any one of them in particular was the, impetus of my wanting to do this. It's a collection of things. I mean, I'm happy to talk about it if you want, but.
And so what would your advice be to aspiring composers who might be watching?
Well, do what you love. If you love making music, pursue that. I think that studying it, becoming the best musician you can, the more skills you have in composing and arranging and orchestrating. And for me, that comes to exposure to as much variety of music, learn from everybody at the same time. I think it's important to develop your own style. This becomes kind of a tricky thing, I think, in scoring, because as composers for scoring, we're hired to do and fulfill a particular job and a particular need. And if you, as important it is to have your own personal style, it also has to translate into the medium. It has to work dramatically in the film or the program. So, but there are people that are doing that. I mean, you probably yourselves have favorite scoring composers who you hear their music and you know who that is, even if you don't necessarily even know what it's from. They have a style. But we can probably also think of music we've heard which we can't really imagine ever being in a film because it's too abstract or too removed from the ability to tell story through music. So I'm kind of rambling, but get to be the most skilled, develop your skills as much as possible as a musician, as a composer, but also work on developing a style that sort of makes you stand out a little bit from the crowd. So it's a double-edged sword.
That's brilliant. Such great advice. You have orchestra credits for projects such as Jumanji and Toy Story 3. What was it like working on these projects?
The Toy Story 3 credit, I actually did not work on Toy Story 3. And there's another movie I'm credited to that James Horner did. I forget the name of it now, that I have a credit on, but I didn't work on. I think that's just a clerical error in the office somewhere. But I did work on, with James Horner on 2 or 3 movies, and Randy Newman and Basil Palladores. Those were wonderful projects. I really, working with James was a thrill. He has such a diverse palette. You're talking about style. He does have a pretty recognizable style, in my opinion. But even within the different genres, I did Jumanji, which is an adventure movie. But if you listen to the score, it doesn't sound like John Williams. It's definitely James Horner, and yet it's serving the same kind of a story in some way. And then we did Balto, which is an animated movie. It's also an adventure, but has different elements to it. And then the other one escapes me at the moment. Oh, of course, Apollo 13. How can I forget? Apollo 13, also very different, simple approach. Kind of developed 1 or 2 themes and just kind of let them play, and they use very minimal kind of materials to develop, but boy, does it work, very dramatic. So it was really great. And I learned a lot from all these people. Yeah.
And I guess more on that, like you said, with the composing side, but also in roles where you were working as an orchestrator and stuff like that, would you say that there's one particular part of working in music that you resonate with the most?
Well, I'm older now, and I mean that in the sense that I've had a lot of years under my belt as a composer and orchestrating all that. So composing for sure, if that's what you're asking me. In fact, when I was busy orchestrating for James and Randy, was around the time, I'd have to check my timeline, that I got asked to do this TV show called Jag. And it wasn't really a hard decision for me. I mean, continue to orchestrate for these incredible movies and these big composers and get paid well, or get to create my own music, which is something I really been wanting to do. And so I had to turn my back on the orchestrating because I wanted to do my own writing. So composing for sure. And once I started kind of going down that path and was doing less and less orchestration, I didn't look back. I didn't want to do more, get back into orchestration. Even today, when I think about the idea of orchestrating someone else's music, it doesn't really appeal to me. It's not an attitude of any kind. It's respectful. It's just that I know myself, and I know, where my strengths are and where my passion is right now. And so that's what I've been focused on for the last, 20 or 30 years now, I guess.
That's quite interesting, that difference between making your own music and also being a part of, developing music written by someone else. And it's interesting because when you think about different projects, it's very easy to forget that quite often there's a different tone to that. And for all there are certain projects where you were the composer, I do wonder how much a studio would influence. So, for instance, you've got credits for, some classic Hanna-Barbera things like Flintstones Christmas and the Easter Yogi. With stuff like that, for all you are the composer, is that very much your style, or at that point would Hanna-Barbera have gone, we're looking for X, Y, and Z?
It's a good question, and I don't think it's a simple answer because I mean, it kind of circles back to your question earlier about advice to budding composers, and I said, learn the craft, but also find your style. When I started, and I think it was probably a combination of the zeitgeist at the time. This is sort of like what guys did, guys getting into composing, but also my own mindset was that I thought the job required me to be a gun for hire. I had to do whatever you asked me to do, whether it's comedy, whether it sound like this, sound like that. I had to be able to, because a lot of times you're either asked directly, like I want this, or you're suffering from the director falling in love with a temp track. I assume you all know what a temp track is, your listeners, if they don't. Very often when directors and producers are cutting their movie, getting it ready before it's even scored, they cut it to music. It helps them pace things and time things, and they pick music they think that likes, and then they hand that to the composer very often when music is already there. And it's very hard to separate yourself from that, both just sort of subconsciously, but also knowing, well, gee, he really likes that. How far away can I really go? I kind of have to stay close to it. So you're always kind of juggling with that. And different relationships, they develop in a way where you get an understanding with the director or producer, and they know that they're handing you this sort of template, but they're okay and want you to leave it alone. So, but it's the whole gamut is what I guess I'm saying. So in the case of Hanna-Barbera, I was thinking about this before we got on the call, and you may even know the answer to this because I know you're very involved in this world. But I believe that my introduction to Hanna-Barbera was through a show called Fish Police. Are you familiar with that?
I believe, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not surprised because it didn't last very long. But so Fish Police was an animated show that came out, I'm going to guess, in the early 90s. And it was around the time The Simpsons arrived and became a big hit, and a lot of people wanted to kind of copy that and get like a primetime adult animated program on the air. And they had this idea for kind of a noir 1930s, hard-nosed cop, prowling the streets and solving crimes and all that sort of thing. But it was all underwater with fish. Hard to imagine. But it was a Hanna-Barbera show. But anyway, James Horner was hired to do the pilot and write the theme because the producer, and I'm going to forget his name, but he's the same one who produced American Tail. They had worked together. And so when I got brought in to do the score, the weekly score, they'd already set the style of the music. They'd worked together, and so I was basically, I knew what I had to do. There wasn't, to the extent, look, the score was a predictable kind of noirish, kind of jazz, walking bass, this kind of thing, with some strings and all the harmonies and that you think of in that kind of music, kind of mysterious. And so I knew the palette I was going to have to work in. I also had a couple of themes that James wrote that I had to use, but the rest of it was me interpreting from my background in jazz. And I suppose in some ways my voice came through, but only to an extent, because, and this is why I mentioned earlier, when you're a composer, you never know what you're going to get asked to do. And I think for me, it's important to be able to do all those things. There are lots of composers who don't have formal, deep training in a lot of areas that do great work, that when they're faced with these kinds of very specific genres, they get help. They may have a sort of general idea. They may write a great theme that's perfect, but they don't know the nuts and bolts of, well, how do you arrange this with this group of instruments to sound authentic? Well, then you get somebody who's a specialist to help you with that. And that sort of thing happens all the time too. So anyway, I think I've diverged a little from your question, but hopefully
No,
in
no,
next
it
summer.
was certainly really interesting to kind of get more of an insight on that, because I think, like you said, to kind of understand that depending on who you're working with can have different expectations, or each project, they can be at a different stage in their mind of, you know, what it is that they're looking to achieve, and then how you can accompany that. And I guess, as you can probably tell from the background around us, something that we are particularly excited to get into that you've worked on is Scooby Doo on Zombie Island. So I believe you composed the music for that movie in 1998. So oh, wow. That was amazing.
It's the video cassette, and when it first came out.
Oh my gosh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
I love that. Well, do you remember how your work on that came about, kind of how you were initially introduced to it and everything?
Well, that's what I was saying. You know, I think I got started with Hanna-Barbera through Fish Police, and then they got to know my work, and I got to know them. There was a music supervisor that was on staff at Hanna-Barbera named Bodie Chandler. You can probably see his name all over stuff if you look for it. And he came to like me and my work, and he was in a position of a certain amount of power in hiring composers for their projects. And so I don't know, you know, you mentioned a Flintstone Family Christmas, Yogi Easter Bear. I don't remember exactly where Scooby Doo came in that progression, but you know, one led to the next, led to the next. So ultimately, one way or the other, Scooby Doo was the result of having met and worked with Bodie and producers at Hanna-Barbera through Fish Police. And they at some point came to me and asked me to do it.
That's amazing. And I guess, you know, we have to know, how familiar were you with Scooby Doo before you started work on the movie?
Well, I have a question for you. I wonder if you can answer this. Do you know what years the original Scooby Doo cartoon was airing?
That was 1969.
69? Okay. So I was probably just a little bit on the older side, so I did not watch Scooby Doo. My diet was more the older stuff from before I was born, the Flintstones, you know, not Tiny Toons, you know, Looney Tunes, the Warner Brothers cartoons. So I didn't really grow up watching Scooby Doo, but I knew of it, obviously. You know, I knew the characters, but I don't know that I watched them. So I didn't have any kind of real personal connection or history with the character when they hired me, other than that.
So when you like signed on to score the movie, were you given scripts or storyboards, or was there another way in which like scenes were pitched to you?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. It's so long ago. I don't think I've ever, not in any of these projects we're talking about, I never saw storyboards. That was, you know, much earlier than I came on board. I certainly saw the completed video, but it might not have been locked, in the sense they may have still been tweaking it and editing it, but essentially it was completed. So they sent me a video cassette, probably, of it. Was my first viewing of it. And they maybe even had, they might have even sent it to me before I met with them, because you all know about a spotting session. I'm assuming what spotting sessions are, or you do, or well, if not, I'll explain it. So in fact, I can even show you. I have some things here. This is, I don't know if you can see this. This is a copy, like a facsimile of a list of cue sheets. So basically, the way to answer your question, I think they sent me the video, I watched it, then I went into their offices and sat with the director and the producer and talked about what they wanted to do. And what you do is a spotting session is you basically go from the very first frame of film to the very last frame and decide where specifically music will and won't go. Like, where does it come in? Where does it go out? When does it come in again? When does it go out again? And you make a list of every cue from the beginning of the movie to the end, with a description, just sort of a general description of what's going on. And there's also, I don't know if you can see here, but there's a timing. There's an actual, you know what SMPTE code is? This is the code the industry uses that is burned into the video, so that when you're working in production, you can synchronize everything with an agreed upon point. You look at the number, you know what frame you're on. So this cue sheet shows you where the music starts and where it goes out. And I take this home. There's a person called a music editor, which prepares all of this. And I use this as a reference. So I'm at home working, I know what I have to do, how much music I have to do, And I can also, I was looking here, more show and tell. I have this, I found this as well. This is a log from the scoring session that showed, as I was working, all of the you know, even with something that's not shot on film, they tend to break them into reels. So each cue has a reel number and a scene number, basically, or cue number, from reel 1 through reel 6. So 6 reels in an hour and a half long. How long does Scooby do? An hour and a half, something like that. And it shows that I had 1, 2, 3, 4 different size orchestras that I was working with. So this is probably a recording session that took 1 to 2 days for the amount of music we had, I'm guessing. So my largest group, I called an A+. My next group was A. Then I had a B orchestra and a C orchestra. And probably the largest orchestra was maybe 50 to 60 musicians. And the smallest may have been a dozen. And so the point of this is that when you have the list of cues, I have to go through and decide, well, which scene do I absolutely have to have everybody playing on? I need the big guns. I need to make a lot of noise and have all the fancies. And then I say, put that in that category. Then there may be another scene that's more intimate or quiet. And I say, well, I can do that with a small group. So you have to figure it out and balance it. So that's the first thing that I would do. And as I said, in the meeting, we would talk about, you know, the director might say, well, in fact, I remember one instance, the opening of that, the main title segues to a song. They had hired some songwriters to write, I think, 2 or 3 songs for the movie. And they knew that this first song was going to start at this particular place, but that my music had to precede it and lead into it. So I had to, you know, I had to devise a way to make that seamless connection, you know, and I can tell you how that worked, but the point is that knowing that, you know, that main title had to go into their song informed me in terms of what kind of instruments I would need or what I might have to have available to me. And also, of course, timing wise, to be sure that, you know, if you have a song that's a particular tempo, that your music is ending at that tempo so that they can connect. What I remember is the song began with kind of a drum fill, like a tom-tom kind of thing. So my music ended with a similar thing, except instead of the drum set playing, it was the concert tom-toms and the orchestra doing digga-digga. So they kind of blend from one to the next and carried on. So.
Yeah, well, my next question was going to be, obviously, there is songs such as Terror Time Again, and was just wondering, like, did you know which scenes would include the other songs? I'm guessing you did. Like, you were told each song was going to take place at this, and you just had to sort of fit your music around them.
In fact, I was trying to see if it was here on this list, because they have designations for the different kinds of music. There's score, which is sort of self-explanatory, and there's something called source music. Source music is when you're watching a movie and you hear the music coming from the radio that you can see in the apartment it's playing. That's from the source music. And then you have songs, and there are other things, visual, instrumental, visual, vocal, if you see someone on camera singing. And so my cue sheet, my list of cue sheets would show exactly where the songs were going to go. So I did know ahead of time. It was essential that I knew, because I didn't want to step on anybody's toes and write music where there already was a song. So yes, I did know ahead of time. I think my memory is that that's the only instance where I had to be concerned about my music, you know, bumping up against a song. I think in the other places there may, because of course there are periods in any movie where there's silence. You don't have any music. So I think those songs maybe appeared apart from, there was no score nearby, so I didn't have to worry about it.
Zombie Island was one of the darker Scooby Doo projects. Were you required to teeter between, you know, more of a family-friendly and light horror in your music too?
I don't think we had a conversation like, you know, you got to be careful. You know, you don't want to scare the kids. You know, I don't remember that kind of thing, but it was obvious to me. And again, you all may know this better than I do, but my memory is that they told me that this story was the first time in Scooby Doo history where the monsters were real, instead of just the neighbor scaring the kids. Am I right, or do you know?
There was a series beforehand. It was 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo beforehand, I think. But it was the first like major movie where the Scooby-Doo gang were up against real supernatural threats.
Okay. Well, so they certainly made a point of telling me that they wanted this to they wanted me to take it serious as a real scary movie. But you know, we know it's Scooby Doo, right? I mean, there's going to be some silliness. There's no avoiding that. And so, and I think when you hear the music, you can hear it kind of shift gears. There's certain scenes where it's full on kind of, I mean, horror is, you know, probably too extreme, but you know, scary, mystery. And there's other cues that are more slapdash and slapstick and comical, and so you had to weave them together. I mean, the opening, you know, I remember it's kind of evocative of, you know, Phantom of the Opera, not Andrew Lloyd Webber's Phantom of the Opera, but, you know, with the organ and the swelling, growing chords, and then the reveal of the title with the jagged writing and everything, and the music kind of hits that, and it's all kind of just, it's at the same time it's serious, but it's also poking fun at the style, right? But then it shifts gears when the characters start, you know, having their jump scares and they're running around, and you get the xylophone and zip, zip, zip. So it's a blending of both. I don't, you know, one of the things that's changed dramatically from when I did that and when I first started to today is today, when you're doing a project, everything a composer writes is previewed. Most composers are writing on their keyboards at home, and they do mock-ups and they send them to the producers and directors, and they can send notes. I hate this, write it again, or I love it, or I love this, but change that. And so when they go to the recording session with the real live musicians, there's no surprises. They know exactly what they're going to get. In the case of Scooby Doo and anything that was written around that time, that was not an option. So nobody got to hear anything before all the musicians were there. So there was a certain amount of trust, great deal of trust. And, you know, if there were any problems, you would just have to fix it there. So nobody heard any of the music I wrote beforehand. I may have plunked out a theme or two on the piano or something, but that's about it. So I think, like I said, I think that, you know, one of the keys, I think, of being a successful scoring composer is understanding the intention of the director. You know, what is it they want to do? I mean, in this case, I mean, Scooby Doo is it's scary, but it's a cartoon. So it you know, you have to understand what it is you're doing and what it is that is expected of you. And that some of that is conveyed through conversations. But I also think that in the case of, you know, I had done some work with Hanna-Barbera and Bodie, they'd come to trust me because I'd done work for them, and they knew, you know, that certain level that I understood what they wanted. I guess is what I'm saying.
Well, I think we can all agree that the music in the movie is second to none. One of our favourite pieces is the instrumental music that plays when the gang travel through Louisiana. Is there a piece or more that you composed for the movie that is your favourite?
That is a favorite of mine, actually. And I like the main title. I like, I think the one that you're talking to, I call Moonscar Island, I believe. And so that is a favorite of mine. There's one I call Dem Bones, which I think is the one where the zombies first come up from the graves, sort of, I don't know, what, a third of the way through or something, that I really liked. It's so long ago that I wrote this, but I'm very proud of the score. You know, I've written a lot of stuff. It's a favorite of mine. It also was performed really, really well. I had a great group of musicians for that in the studio. I believe we recorded it at Paramount Studios, which is sadly no longer around, but was one of the great scoring stages, and all the people involved. So it's a really good sounding score. One of the things that I found sort of frustrating is that how old is it now? Is it 30 years?
25, like in like a week's time.
What year?
It's coming up to 25 years this year.
25 years. So I still get queries regularly about this and the music, and I'm always frustrated that I can't offer them, direct them to a soundtrack, because they never released one. And I've tried, I've inquired about it, but they just don't seem to be interested. But I guess the point is that it brings me, pleasure to know that people still enjoy it and remember it. And I often will run into people, usually anywhere from like 25, 30, 35, maybe even 20 years old, who they almost flip out when they find out that I worked on it, because I guess it was a very, very popular thing growing, when you're growing up at that time. So I get a lot of, satisfaction. It's nice to hear that people, it resonates with people.
That is really, really interesting, because one of my questions is, it's interesting to hear that there doesn't seem to be any interest from Warner Brothers about releasing a soundtrack. But one thing that I was really happy about was when I went on your website and I saw that there were tracks there. Is it a case where you have all of the tracks, if Warner Brothers ever wanted to release it, it's just they're not willing on their end, or would they have to fish it out?
Yeah, as far as I understand it, because there are a couple of labels, I think one of them is called La La Land or something. They do a lot of animation soundtrack. They've told me they would like to do it. The problem, as I understand it, is that the legal department at Warner Brothers, which I think owns Hanna-Barbera now, it's kind of like they can't be bothered. I mean, imagine it's a certain amount of time they have to. It's just legal fees and just some papers, really. It's not, because, like you said, I have the recordings. You just hand them to somebody, and today there's no disc that needs to be pressed. It's digital. You upload them. Maybe there's a little bit of work. So it's really, I think, mostly just the legwork and time of some lawyers. And I don't know, lawyers are expensive in the studio, so they may not want to spend the money of I'm guessing a few $1,000s, maybe. I don't know what it costs. So what I would say to those listening, if you really want a soundtrack, contact Warner Brothers.
Yeah, I mean, I know you said that, it's just digital, and honestly, I would, give my left arm for a digital release of the soundtrack, but also in the back of my mind as well, I do have a vision of like a deluxe CD coming out, especially for the 25th anniversary. I think that would have been cool. It's a shame that Warner Brothers don't seem to be open to that, because this would be the perfect time.
You should do it, and you can be the producer.
I'd absolutely
have your own production, label or something. You can ask around, but I do think it's really just about the legal fees and the time, and I can't, because I don't understand why else. I mean, obviously there's what's the market for it? Like, how many of these could you sell? And if you're going to spend even $5,000 to do it, can you make the money back? And that's the other key. And it's, even though I get inquiries often, maybe it's not enough to make the money back. I don't know.
Definitely interesting. It'd be interesting to see the reception of this clip, when this interview comes out. And more on that, I suppose, is there anything that you composed for the movie that ended up being part of a scene that was deleted and it wasn't, in the final version at all?
Not that I'm aware of. No. I don't think, the picture was pretty much locked. I mean, there may have been a scene where they decided to take the music out, but I don't think so. I've had that happen in other projects, and I think some others might have a different view about it, but I think it's probably less common in animation to do that. I mean, this kind of animation, because it relies so heavily on the music to tell the story, it would really have to not work for them to decide no and to leave it dry. A lot of this stuff doesn't play well without music. It needs to have that support. So I have no memory of anything like that. I mean, this is I don't know if you can see this, but this is the score.
Oh, wow.
And, there's all the different cues and such. Yeah. So I mean, I don't think. Yeah, I don't think there's anything that they didn't use.
That's
Fantastic
incredible.
just
Yeah.
to see that folder.
Like even that, like if that was on sale, even like one sheet of that, I would frame it, and oh, that's incredible.
Well, you know, I was trying to see if I had the main title here, but I think I took it out. I've had occasionally when I've gone to give little master classes and stuff where well, here's the main title. You can see this. I don't know, can you read that?
Oh
It's the
wow.
main title. And at the end here, if I can find it, I don't want to. This little bit right here, I don't know if this is coming, but you see it says here concert tom-toms. This is the figure that leads to the rock and roll song that follows. Remember I was talking about that? So at the end, the orchestra sort of just holding, and then you have these drums kind of take over. Anyway, it's fun for me to talk about it too.
It's so fun to
long ago.
see because after, like JayBee said, it's 25 years this year. At that point, you kind of worry as to what has happened to these things, and just to see that they're still in existence is absolutely amazing. And I know, like you said, lots of people still get so excited to hear that you worked on Zombie Island, and I think it's fair to say that for a lot of people, it is certainly like their defining Scooby Doo memory is watching Zombie Island. So when you were working on it, did you ever have any indication that it was going to be the success that it was? And I know that you say it's still amazing to this day to hear how people react to it.
No, there was no way I would know. Absolutely not. I don't even know if they knew that there would be more of them after. So I thought maybe we're going to make this and let's see what happens. There's no way. But it became apparent to me, I don't know, when my son was growing. I mean, he's too young to have seen it when it was, out, but I started to notice some of his friends when they were kind of in their teens just had discovered it and then were telling me about it. And then suddenly I realized that and as I said, my wife has a friend who lives in Asia, I think, where they communicate, over Zoom and the phone. And he's in his late 20s or 30s, and same thing. He grew up watching this, and he was all excited. So I've come to find that for a certain generation, it was a big deal. I had no way of knowing that.
No, I mean, it certainly is still a huge part of, like you say, those 20, 30-year-olds. We're still there, we still love it. And I think it's fair to say that for all we took a few years break from Scooby Doo, when we saw there was going to be a return to Zombie Island, our hearts went back to Zombie Island and wanted to know exactly what they were planning doing to our kind of favorite childhood memories sort of thing. So it certainly, it's a defining moment for us. And I guess kind of getting towards the end of our questions now, are there any projects that you're working on at the minute that you can discuss or anything like that?
Well, it's 180 degrees from Scooby Doo, but I've written an opera actually, which I'm now in the process of getting up and running, and it's a whole other world. But making connections and we have some people who seem to be interested in it, but it's a long process. But that's been just composing has taken a bit of time. It was my pandemic project, right? We all had our pandemic projects when things kind of slowed down, and it's like, what do I do? And so I had this idea, and I recently finished it, and so I'm working on developing that. That's what's happening. So once there's any substantial news about it, I'll put it up on my website, and people know that on Facebook or something. So
yeah. So you've just mentioned website there. Is that the best place for people to, keep up with your work? Do you have any other social media?
Yeah, that's it. I'm a little bit of a Luddite when it comes to social media. I know I probably should have more of a presence on Instagram and stuff, but I have a Facebook page, but I'm not very active on it. I'll be honest with you. But if anything really, significant comes along, I'll put it up. So yes, I would say the website, my website, and Facebook, and there is an email address on my website if people want to reach out for any reason. I get emails from time to time about this project. So.
That is absolutely incredible. So I will leave all of those links in the description down below, as well as everyone else's social links as well. But that does conclude the questions that we had for you today. Just thank you so much for joining. It's been absolutely amazing to hear about not only your career, but also going into all the details about Zombie Island as well. It's been amazing. Thank you.
It's a lot of fun. Thanks for asking me. And please send me a link when it's up, and I'll
I
share it.
absolutely will do that. I'm really looking forward to it. So for the purpose of everyone watching, thank you so much for tuning in to another interview. If you do want to see more, then please like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one.